the story of 3rd Class Petty Officer James Huffman, aka my papa. Seabees can do!
All right. First thing I did is I joined the Navy Reserve, and it was over on Alcoa Highway. And I went in from Knoxville to AFES training, or to the AFES examination station in Nashville by bus from Knoxville. And it stopped at every pig path between Knoxville and Nashville that you could think of. We did our examination there, and they swore us in. Came back, attended quite a few meetings, then was sent to U.S. Navy training station in Chicago. That was a fun trip. First time I'd ever flown. We flew from Knoxville to Cincinnati, had plane trouble. They beat on the plane wing and got us back up in the air after a couple of hours sitting in the plane. Got in Chicago way late, later than we were supposed to be. Walked out of the airport, down to the street, and across the street over to the train that would take us out to the Naval Training Station. The wind was blowing about 90 miles an hour, and it was about 15 degrees. And we were in dress blues and like froze to death. Got on the train, rode out to Evanstonville, got off the train, and there was two lights, one way over here on the left, one way over there on the right, at the military base. So we picked the wrong one first, so we had to walk a long way with our gear, then walk back over to the other place. They checked us in, they put us in a room where we would sleep for the night, and then we went through the basic training there. Came back to Knoxville, attended different training sessions down at our Naval Reserve Base, got the opportunity to cross-rate from the Navy to the Seabees and become a petty officer because of work experience. So I went from there, got changed over, and they sent me to Davisville, Rhode Island for petty officer training for the Seabees. When I first went to Davisville, Rhode Island, we flew in up there, went over and checked in at the naval base, and they said that it was right on Friday, and they said, well, why don't you make it for the weekend? There's a motel across the road over there that you'd put you up reasonable. That way you won't have to be on base till Monday morning. So we went over there, got checked in. People were real nice. We stowed our bags in there and went out to get something to eat. As we were walking back toward the motel, in whooped a couple of our state trooper car. Two officers jumped out and threw guns down on us and told us to stand still. They started quizzing us, and three guys had robbed a bank. Of course, we kind of goofy looking people from Tennessee anyway, so they thought we was the robbers. But once they looked at us, they let us go. But they asked us what we were doing. We told them we'd just checked in at the base across the street and that we would spend the night there. And so when we went back the next day, after it was on Monday, we went back to the base, and we didn't get out and run around up there after that. We stayed up there. It was an old air base from World War II. We stayed in wooden barracks that they claimed had burned down in about 2 minutes if it caught on fire, so they had fire drills all the time. And then we went through our training there. While we were there, we went over to the firefighting school, and also went through the gas chamber so that you'd know what tear gas was like. And it was a fun experience. I was glad that was over, but the most fun I had in any training was the firefighting school. They ran us all day long, and the guys were just fantastic at teaching you stuff that was important that you know how to do with firefighting. Then I got transferred from there after training out to Port Hueneme, California, and was assigned to MCB 3. I was out there a few months. Then they sent us off to Vietnam. We flew from the United States to Hawaii on a 4-motor prop job. I think it was Saturn Airways. we lost the engine on the way, and they worked on it while we sat in the terminal in Hawaii for about 2 hours. That was my free trip to Hawaii. Flew from there to Okinawa, got on a prop job military aircraft. In the back of it, with no seating, you just held on to all of the stuff that was strapped down and flew into Vietnam. And from there, got from Da Nang on down to Chu Lai. At Chu Lai, we got to our base and stayed there for the 3 months that we stayed with the battalion. It rotated back to the States. When we were leaving Vietnam, we flew out on a C-141, which was the biggest cargo plane they had at that time. And the pilot come in with just enough fuel to make it there and back to Yokosuka, Japan. He landed, we got on the plane and took off and flew to Yokosuka, and they fueled it up, and then we flew to the States. But before we left Vietnam, Hanoi Hannah was telling us that we'd have a safe trip home, that there wasn't nobody going to shoot at the pilot, because he said if he took one round, he would not land. So we made it back to the States, went back to Port Hueneme, stayed there a little bit, got R&R, came home, went back, and got reassigned when we went back after R&R to Vietnam, and I stayed about a year in Vietnam at Da Nang. Worked in the Master at Arms office at the last part of it. The day before we left Vietnam to come back to the States from Da Nang, we spent the night at our base. The adjacent air cavalry base next to us got hit with mortars that blew up a helicopter that the boy under it was supposed to come home the same time I was. When we got over to Da Nang Air Base to get back on the plane to come home, different ones were telling us about that. We got on the commercial aircraft to come back to the States, which was a large aircraft with no dividers in it. You could see from one end to the other. It was so quiet on that aircraft as it took off in Vietnam, you could hear a pin drop. In a little bit, the captain came on and he said, "Gentlemen, we're over international waters," and pandemonium broke out, screaming and hollering, and everybody being proud to head back to the United States. Mm-hmm. And they gave us food and stuff to eat, and we had a good time till we landed in the States. It was a funny feeling to get off of that aircraft and touch down on American soil again. So we got off and got our sea bags and went over to the naval base. They put us up for the night. We left the naval base, went out to get something to eat because it was late at night. We walked into a restaurant and we noticed the waitresses are up around the door just standing talking to each other. So we got our orders and they brought it to the table, and we looked up and there was a guy come busting through the door, was going to kill one of the waitresses. But as he come through the door, two big old Long Beach policemen drug him back out the door. We finished our meal and went back to the base and didn't go nowhere after that. I bought this jacket from a street vendor there in Chu Lai, just to have as a memory thing. They didn't have a jacket that was the size that I'd wear, but it shows that it was in Chu Lai in 1966 and has the outline of the country on it. I just thought it'd be interesting to have and was going to give it to my nieces, but I never did. When we were getting ready to go to Vietnam, they gave us some classes on what to expect, and they told us that it was, in some instances, like going back to the Stone Age, that a lot of things would be done by muscle power. Well, when we got over to Vietnam and traveled around a little bit, not a lot because we had to stay on our bases, but I actually saw two men cutting a great big mahogany log that must have been 4 foot in diameter and about 16 or 18 feet long with a pit saw. That meant one man was standing on top of it sawing and one man down the bottom, and they pulled the saw up and down cutting boards. I also saw a place where they were making ice, and they had a water buffalo walking in a circle powering the generator that put the power to the freezer part making ice. All of the rice fields around where we were, they were moving water either by hand with scuttles or with uh, a water wheel. Working in the Master at Arms office, I saw what the officers would write when they went down and eat in our chow hall. And their favorite thing was that it was sufficient in quantity and kind. They never said it was good or what it was. They'd just say sufficient in quantity and kind, and sometimes it wasn't fit to eat. But they did serve us steak, and that was always good when we had the steak. But they'd serve spaghetti, and that had a detrimental effect to your intestines the next morning. One holiday weekend there, we all was going to have a party in our barracks, and one of the boys that worked out in the material yard had taken a fire extinguisher that was brand new and had never been charged, cleaned it out real good. We filled it with ice, Coke, and whiskey, and made us a cocktail shaker out of it. You'd shake that thing up, and then it'd squirt that whiskey out in glasses. And so, needless to say, we was a little bit inebriated there in the barracks that one evening. But the GIs will come up with something new to do anytime you're anywhere. Yeah. I'll never forget one day we were walking back toward the chow hall, and they had a little Vietnamese pot-bellied pig that was there that the cooks fed. But he come running out of there, and the boy with me said, "Look at there," said, "the food's so bad the pig won't even eat it." That reminds me of the first time I had a meal there at Da Nang. They had what looked like some good old pork chops there. So I got me a couple of them, got my other food, they just slopped it on your plate and you went over and sat down. I bit down on one of them pork chops, and it's the most horrible thing I ever eaten. It was lamb, and it tasted like a candle with a horrible bad taste to it. I never got me another pork chop like that again. We had a supply yard on the end of our base that we kept all kinds of materials in, and during the night you had to have a patrol running around inside the perimeter wire with about a 6-foot page fence. On top of it, it had concertina wire that's rolls of barbed wire, and on the outside there was about 3 rolls of barbed wire around against the fence. And we were going around, and we come back around toward our biggest guard tower, and there was a ship that was pulled in there at our base, was going to offload the next day, and we saw some people creeping up the beach. So the boy with me shot off a pop flare, and they come hollering up out of the sand there, "We Japanese, no shoot, no shoot." And of course we had to go down on the beach and see their papers and stuff and call in, and they were actually who they were, but they weren't supposed to be off that boat on our beach. So that was the craziest thing we saw there. Then one night when we were doing roving patrol, there was a young fella had got inside our perimeter wire. He took off running toward the perimeter wire, jumped up on the fence and flipped himself up over the top of that page fence and the barbed wire, come down on the outside without getting into the concertina wire, and took off. So you had all kinds of strange things go on. They'd have guys come out, sit down out in the field out away from our base and shoot at our guard towers. Our guard towers couldn't fire unless they called in and got permission, and all they were allowed to use was a shotgun. So they kind of helped put us into mortar pits because they could get by with it without getting shot at. This is a desk marker that I had made for me over in Vietnam, and it was at Marble Mountain in Da Nang, and it was carved over there. One of the guys got it and brought it to me after we'd ordered it, and it has the year that I was there from 66 and 67 and came home in 68. It's got the CB emblem on that side, and then the back side of it's carved, and I've been able to keep it. I managed to get it home from Vietnam in my sea bag, and of course brought it back, and I've kept it all these years. So I'm real happy with having that. While I was in Vietnam, I had the wisdom teeth start giving me trouble, and the temperature was about 105 that day. I walked down to the infirmary, and they took those teeth out, shot me up with some Novocaine and stuff. I staggered back to my barracks and got in to my cube, and I took my tape player and set it out and put a long playing tape on, laid down and went to sleep, woke up without a tape player. Somebody stole it while I was passed out. Of course, nobody saw it because it was about the middle of the day. So I lost a tape player and my wisdom teeth. And the heat was really bad that day, so I was kind of wore out, but I had to get up and go to work the next day. When I was in Vietnam, the normal work week on our base was 6 days, that you had to get up early and be at your post. And of course, I worked in the Master at Arms office, and the other boys worked out in the material yard. And as the day went on, they'd get hotter and hotter. It'd get up to 100, 105 degrees, and really make you not feel good. So that having that Sunday morning to sleep in was good, except for the fact that every Saturday night, almost every Saturday night, the Vietnamese opposition of ours would come around and lob something at our base to put us in the mortar pits. And we'd have to stay in there from whatever time they attacked the perimeter wire until the next morning. So they'd blow our Sunday morning sleep-ins. We'd be sitting out in the mortar pit until daylight broke, and then you'd get to go back and go eat breakfast and go back to your job. But it was 7 days a week. It wasn't, you didn't get Sundays off for nothing. You had your jobs to do. We were going through some survey training and had classes real early in the morning and stuff. And there was about 8 of us in this one little barracks. And it became the weekend, and Bob, my buddy from San Francisco, and one of the other fellas that was from Georgia, who had been married basically all of his life and had never got out and drank or done anything, Bob got him to go with him out to clubbing. So they went up to San Bernardino, and they was a time went on pretty good, and they started driving back, and that boy'd say, "Bob, come back at 60 miles an hour." A little bit he'd say, "Oh," said Bob, "come back at 70 miles an hour." Kept getting a little faster with his conversation, us laying there in the dark and him telling what all Bob and him had done. And he got up to about 100 miles an hour, and then he threw up. The other guys in the room started to fuss, and Bob stood up and said, "All of you shut up," said, "Marion ain't ever done nothing in his life, and he deserved this." Oh, he's a good bunch of people, I'm telling you. They're crazy.
I bet.
I went to San Francisco from Port Hueneme. It was a friend of mine's family lived in San Francisco. They lived out close to the Golden Gate Park, and Bob's daddy was a fireman, fire chief. And I got to go up and stay with him, and we were out riding around, and there was a Volkswagen in front of us with a bunch of hippies in it, dragging around, and I was aggravating Bob over it. I said, "See, this is the land of the fruits and nuts." I said, "This is horrible, the way these hippies do." And he said, "Look at the license plate." Turned out it was a Tennessee license plate. I had to shut up and eat my words. When we got back from Vietnam, I got to go through training at Port Hueneme, and once that training was completed, I got R&R before I went back to Vietnam for the second trip. I went from our Port Hueneme down to LA and over to LA International Airport. went into, I believe it was Delta Airlines, trying to get a flight to Knoxville because I'd had a short time for my leave before I had to be back to ship out again. And they didn't have a flight going toward Knoxville in any direction that I could get on. So I started walking around International Airport, which is a big circle. I kept walking, going to different airlines, going around through there. Nobody had a flight going that they could connect any way back east for me. Walked all the way around to Braniff Airways carrying my sea bag. Braniff said they didn't have a flight heading east, but they could put me with Northwest Orient Airlines that would fly into New Orleans, and from New Orleans I could get a flight on a Delta up to Atlanta. So the old boy was real nice. He said, "Give me your sea bag, it'll be on the flight when you leave." Told me where to go to get on Northwest Orient Airlines. I flew into New Orleans. It was in the middle of the night. Then I got a flight from there, but the flight from New Orleans to Atlanta kept flashing that the Delta Airlines was going to be scrubbed at the gate. So I got on another Airlines United and flew into Atlanta, and my parents drove down and picked me up and brought me back to Knoxville. So I got to spend my time with them a little quicker because of the guy at Braniff Airways, or I'd have had to wait another day or so just to get a flight back home.
Seabees can do.